To begin your understitching sample, start with a piece of cotton fabric, face up, and a piece of lining face down. Make sure both pieces have been pressed properly. At the sewing machine, using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, you will begin and end your piece with a backstitch. Understitching is used in things like necklines and the tops of skirts, and is generally used so that the lining rolls under so that it doesn't show on the outside of the fabric. Once you have ended your stitch, be sure to clip your threads as close as possible to the edge, and then head on over to the ironing board. At the ironing board, we're going to be pressing both seam allowance towards the lining. Press the seam allowance away from the woven fabric, and make sure that there aren't any bumps or tucks, and you should really almost see the stitch line on that side. And then press on the other side, making sure that both of the seam allowances are facing towards the lining. Next, we're going to be doing the understitching, which is where we stitch about 1/8 or 1/16 of an inch away from the seam line so that all of the seam allowances get stitched to the lining only. Make sure that you have your fabric open and you're only stitching through the 2 seam allowances and the lining. A lot of people will just top stitch all of the pieces in half, and that isn't how we do the understitching. After you've stitched, beginning and ending with the back stitch, the lining to the seam allowances, clip your threads close to the end, and you'll see that you have a row of stitching that is just on the lining and the seam allowances. At the iron, press any wobbles that have occurred flat, and then you'll notice that the fabric naturally wants to roll under towards the seam allowance. We're going to be pressing it so there's about 1/16 of an inch of the outer fabric showing so that the lining will be totally hidden. You can use this when you're working on necklines and the tops of skirts, and you have now completed your sample.